All right, welcome back to the Picking Your Brain podcast. My name is Blake Lewis, and I am here to ask questions to people doing ministry at a high level so we can learn from them and hopefully grow ourselves. This week on the podcast, we have Chris Ransbottom, and we are looking forward to asking him a few questions so we can pick his brain. What's up, Chris? Thank you for joining me today.
So, Blake, good to see you. Hey, I passed on this already while we were chatting, but the wife passed on her hello, congratulations, and you got beautiful girls. So there we go. It's good to see you.
Thank you. The girls look beautiful, thankfully, because of my wife. Nothing to do with me.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear that. As a fellow girl dad, I completely understand and identify with that. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. All right, Chris. So some people listening to this may not know who you are, so let them know where you're serving and all those good things.
Yeah. So I'm in the Dallas area, so Midlothian, First Baptist Church Midlothian. This is my hometown. So I've been at this church for 6 years as the student pastor, recently transitioning over into the discipleship pastor role. So doing both jobs right now until we find a new youth pastor and all that. So that's a unique season as well. But just being able to celebrate my first class all the way through middle school and high school, seeing them graduate here in a couple of months will be one of the greatest joys of ministry. That's where I'm serving. I'm married to Lauren. She's from Houghton. And so
Nice.
we've been married for 8 years, met at church camp. So that's always a fun story. And we've got two girls, got a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. So they're keeping us full of joy and life.
That's cool. And I've been at my church now for 8 years, and so I know exactly what you're talking about. When you see that group of students walk the stage and remember them as little weird sixth graders, now to walk across,
weird.
it's that
so
really
weird. Yeah.
But it's so sweet to see how the Lord has worked through their life. And anyway, you're going to be a lasting impact on them for the rest of their life. That's really, really cool.
Yeah.
So longevity is great.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun getting like high school graduation announcements and then getting college graduation announcements and then getting wedding announcements and baby announcements. So we're getting into that whole routine, and it's so much fun. Stay, deep roots bear fruit. Deep roots bear fruit. Stay where you're at. If there's a youth pastor, like stay where you're at as long as you can.
Absolutely.
Deep roots bear fruit. Right? So much joy there.
Absolutely. Yeah, we saw one of our first students from our last church. Her name's Samantha. They had their first baby, and that was really, really cool and weird. I felt super old. Like, no, I remember you as a seventh grader.
Yeah, you will.
Why do you have a kid?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Anyway. So again, Chris, thank you for joining and today. And just for real quick, anybody listening, the whole purpose of this podcast really came from what happened in my life a month or two ago. We were having at our church our annual staff planning meeting, and so for me personally, I wanted to just sit down, take some time, and think through who are some guys from all over the country that are doing ministry at a high level that I would want to have a conversation with. And so me and Chris, his wife and I went to school together, so I kind of knew him through that. And we also go to a mutual camp, Camp Fuego. Shout out Camp Fuego. I had known of Chris and thought he's done ministry for really, really, really well for a long time. And so I reached out to him. We spent about an hour or 2 hours on the phone talking. I really enjoyed that conversation. I learned a lot from it. And so I thought he would be a perfect guest to bring on for the very first person for the Picking Your Brain podcast. And so again, I'm thankful to have you here. And are you ready to let me pick your brain a little bit again?
Let's go. I'll set the bar low, and so we just go up from there for the future guests, right?
Oh, whatever. I like that setup. You have a sick setup. That's awesome. If you're just listening to the audio, I apologize.
Yeah, I'm not responsible for any of this. This is the media team. No, I'd mooch off of them.
Well, it looks awesome. It's awesome. Well, the format for this podcast is real simple. I'm just going to ask a few questions about you as a minister and how you think about ministry. So hopefully we can learn a little bit from you today. Yeah. The first thing that I want to start off with, and I think it kind of helps us get an insight of who you are, is what do you do on your days off? As ministers, we don't get a lot of days off. And so the little bit of time we do, what do you do to fill that time?
Yeah. the off days are varying in degrees, especially the last 3 years. Whenever kids entered the picture, we get at our church we
Absolutely.
get Fridays off, right? So Friday Saturday is our weekend, and so I'm an avid golfer, and so I enjoy if I do have that opportunity, I'll go play golf. If Lauren is home and the girls are home, like a family day that usually starts with breakfast at Waffle House, and then we go, end up at Home Goods or something is most likely what's probably going to happen. This last Saturday, we ended up at IKEA. So that was like free entertainment for a few hours. IKEA, just maybe a random thought. It was great. It was great. But yeah, if it's something for me, like I need those recharge times personally. And I love people. I can flip the switch and be on, but that wears me out for sure. And so I need that recharge
Yes.
time where I go to the golf course, I walk so that I can slow down, be a little more
Whew.
intentional. There is a little exercise involved. Yeah. And I throw the AirPods in and I'm listening to podcasts. I love podcasts. I love audiobooks. So I'm just listening and using that outlet of golf to be outside. And that's my off day for sure.
Nice, nice. And so I love to play golf too, but I can't imagine having to walk. Um, I played in high
Yeah.
school, and I played on a very bad high school golf team. But so that's not a flex at all. But playing in
Yeah.
golf in high school, we had to walk every day. Our practice
Oh yeah.
rounds are so.
I
So now
remember.
that I'm
Yeah.
older, I'm just riding.
I remember like making that. I'm in high school. I'm never carrying my bag again. I'm always going to walk, and I was always going to ride, and we would make fun of the kids with like the push carts. And now I got me a push cart. That thing is so sick. I love that thing. I got it loaded
Yes,
with all the accessories, like the cup holder and the sand hole. Anyway, it's tricked out, right? So now I feel cool with it.
that's
The high school kids probably think I'm dumb, but I think it's cool.
no, that's wisdom. That's wisdom is what it is. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
All right. Well, next question I want to ask is what does your daily quiet time look like? I know for me, as I've grown, that has looked differently throughout the years. And so, what works for you for your daily quiet time?
Yeah, again, varies. In the last 3 years, used to it was I wake up first thing in the morning, which is a discipline. I'm more of the night person, but
Me too.
discipline myself for that, waking up early. And I like the slow routines of the morning. And so I like to make my own coffee in the morning, that slow process, nothing quick. I like to wake up. I like to spend my first 10 minutes or so listening because I'm a doer, I'm a planner, I'm an organizer, like I'm a systematic kind of guy. And so I like to have a
Hmm.
plan for my day and accomplish a lot. I like having the check boxes and checking things off throughout the day. If I do something on my day that wasn't on my list, I'll write it down just so I can check it off, right? I'm one of those people. And
Yep.
so I like to combat that by spending my first cup of coffee is kind of the way that I've been advised wisdom from another pastor, is to spend that first cup of coffee just listening because you can't rush through that. It's not like I can just throw back a bottle of water at room temperature or something. Like it has to be a slow process. And so that
Yeah.
first 10 minutes or so is just me listening and in silence. So I really enjoy that discipline. But I use Jonathan Pokluda, JP, his to get a time, get a place, get a plan. It's kind of the way that he always structured it. And
Hmm.
that just stuck with me as an easy way to think about it. Right. And so the time, and decide this beforehand, right? The time is 6 a.m., right? The
Hmm.
place is the kitchen table, and the plan is Matthew, right? Whatever that is, right? But for
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
in these last couple of years, this last season, the time has varied with a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. You don't know when they're going to wake up, so
Yep.
sometimes the time is in the morning, first thing. Sometimes the time is my lunch break. Sometimes the time is at night after Lauren and the girls have gone to bed. I don't know, and so that
Yeah.
varies with the place. But the plan generally never changes. And so, like right now, I'm going through Matthew, and I use the Here Journal model, right?
Yeah.
Highlight,
Me too.
explain, apply, respond. Yeah. So just the discipline of
Mhm.
also journaling, which slows me down, so I don't just kind of rush through a reading. And so
Yep.
a way to just slow down and engage, like write down, not type, like I'm writing down, engaging the text and everything. So
So at the very beginning, you're talking about sitting in silence. What encouraged you to do that? And then was that a hard discipline to start to just sit? And how long do you sit? I know you said a cup of coffee. Is that 10, 15 minutes? What does that look like?
yeah. Yeah, it's about 10 minutes. It's about a 10-ounce cup of coffee. It takes me about 10 minutes to get through. And so, yeah, it was something that I realized I was spending more time in. I used to start my quiet time with a time of prayer, right? And so I
Yeah.
noticed that
Mm-hmm.
involved more me talking, trying to get my agenda into heaven rather than getting heaven's agenda into me. And so that's where
Oh,
that
that's
that
good.
shift needed to take place. And so I, again, being a doer, an accomplisher, knowing that at my worst, that looks like me telling God how He can fit into my plans for the day, and realizing, man, everything I'm doing is centered around my own ability, and I'm just hoping God will join in rather than me submitting myself to, Lord, where are you working, and let me just join in, right? And so it's just more listening in silence.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me of Psalm 46, be still and know that I am God. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah. And I would agree. That's something I struggle with to just sit. And I love how you put it. And I marked the clip on here. So we need to hear that again. That was really good
yeah,
about, not putting my agenda into heaven, but bringing heaven down. Oof, that was good. That's worth it
yeah,
right there.
yeah.
So
There you go.
awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Next thing I want to mention or just bring up is how much time do you spend on sermon prep? You can just give a kind of quick answer on that, but really, what resources do you typically use? Do you have commentaries you use? Do you watch certain videos? What does a sermon prep look like for you?
Yeah, it's good. So, uh, two different contexts. One, on Wednesday, for a Wednesday night sermon with student ministry. I After I preach on a Wednesday, I take, at some point, I'll block out, depending on what my Thursday looks like, but I block out an hour in order to kind of evaluate, go back through, what did I talk about, what did I maybe have to skip over, what didn't maybe communicate as well that as I hoped, or what landed a lot better than I expected, and I'll kind of make notes of that on my previous so last night's sermon, and then use that as a launching point to plan for the next week. And so by the end of Thursday, I want to have an outline. Just here's what the next text is. Maybe here are the headers of my points. Maybe here was an illustration that I want to continue using, like a thread from last week into this week, stuff like that. So I get a general outline by Thursday, and then I spend on Tuesday the following week. I go to a coffee shop in town, and just from 8 to noon, I sermon write. And if I have anything left after that time, then Wednesday, usually that means like an intro illustration or a closing illustration
Yeah,
or response, or maybe like a transition from one point to the next. But it's generally periphery things. It's not the meat of what I'm going to be doing. And so as far as resources go, a whole range of
hmm
I enjoy the commentary life sort of study, but I, I sometimes listen to sermons. More of that comes from maybe podcasts I've heard around a specific topic. I'll
yeah,
call people. There's just a whole host of things, but I try to spend the majority of the time just kind of going through it with me and maybe a commentary, and then find those assisting resources. Y'all mentioned on the last episode Tony Evans' book. Yes, yes, and amen.
yeah,
I second or third or however many people have amen that one so far. Like, yes, it's so good. It's so good.
yeah. So I thought it was very interesting. I don't know that I've ever heard anybody say that they go back the next day over their sermon. I thought that's really cool. That's probably, I don't know if that's
Yeah,
bad of me. When I'm done, I kind of like, all right, let me move on to the next one. What's next
yeah,
Wednesday? And so what? Just
yeah.
I guess very quickly, what does that look like? What do you? Anyway, just if you can, I know you already elaborated a little bit on it, but again, I thought that was really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, I'll use it. It's just I'll print it out and take a pen or maybe a highlighter, and I'll take note of what did I not talk about. Maybe the night just maybe a song went a little longer. There's a teaching moment from the worship leader, and so that went about 5 minutes longer. And I try to be respectful of people's time, or maybe I just notice as I look out and see, are the people I'm talking to receiving this well, or do they seem
Yeah,
lost? I may just kind of move past a point a little quicker, and I may want to circle back and either cover that, or I may ask,
that's
why
good.
did that not land very well? Like, what about it? Was I talking over their head? Was I talking way too simple, and they just kind of checked out because, okay, I know this, I've heard it. Like, what was it? And was it a certain kind of illustration that just didn't work? Could I have been a little more kind of relevant to something going on currently? I don't know. I just ask questions
Yeah,
about how that went. Did I communicate what I was hoping to? And again, I like to try to have threads through an entire series. If it's a book series, if it's a topical series,
Yeah.
whatever the case may be, I like to have threads that I come back to. Like this past semester, we preached all the way through the Sermon on the Mount over the course of about 10 weeks. And so there were common things that kind of were woven through the whole thing. And I wanted to make sure, did I keep that consistent through last night? How can I make sure I communicate that again
Yeah.
tomorrow or next week? And so just while it's fresh, I like to keep those things in an evaluation standpoint, because I sometimes I'll do a manuscript of my entire sermon, and it's everything
Yeah.
I might say, not everything I'm going to say. So inevitably,
Yeah.
I'm skipping stuff all the time. I got a lot of off ramps to be able to
Okay.
move to the next point. And so sometimes I'll just take a chunk and be like, I didn't cover that, but that might be good for next week. And anyway, so whole different, it looks very different, but
Yeah,
yeah,
no, that's really interesting. Because I'm maybe a little bit on the opposite of the spectrum. Like I have maybe one page, maybe 2 pages of notes, and I'm going detail. Like I know I'm hitting every one of these points, and I almost never venture off. And so that's really interesting. And I can see
yeah,
why that would be beneficial the next day to go back through and said, I have all this information. I covered, X, Y, and Z, but I didn't cover this. I want to go back. Man, that's good. That's going to help somebody. I think
yeah,
that's awesome.
yeah, yeah. I hope so.
Um, all right, we'll have time for maybe two more questions. And so the
Yeah,
next one I want to ask you specifically is, how do you evaluate this kind of on the same topic? How do you evaluate your ministry as a whole? Like if you're looking back over the year, most people right now are potentially doing that, looking at the last year. And then how do you evaluate specific events that maybe you do in
yeah.
ministry?
Yeah, that's good. For sure, my favorite question so far. And this sort of thing changed everything for me. I just when I started as a student pastor, uh, June of 2017, I did the events and brought in 500 students and could draw a crowd with the best of them and take hundreds of kids to camp and all that. And something about that just didn't quite seem right. And I didn't know how to think differently about it because I was still new. So I just did what I saw other successful, quote unquote, successful youth
Yeah,
pastors doing. And COVID hit, and it allowed me to slow down and stop being what functionally I was just an event planner, right? You feel
yeah,
that like hamster wheel of plan fall kickoff, and then you got to plan a retreat, and then you get into Thanksgiving and Christmas time, then you got to plan for the spring kickoff and groups,
hmm,
and you got to plan for another D now probably in the winter, and then maybe a spring break mission trip and graduation stuff, and then you got to start with camp and all the summer activities just in time to do fall kickoff again. And you see it's just over and
yeah,
over, and you never slow down and go, okay, let me look at what we're producing, and is that good? Is it right?
yeah.
And so COVID helped me do that to say, what are we accomplishing? We're accomplishing really good attendance, and we're teaching people how to be really good church attenders. But are we making disciples? Right? Are we
Yeah,
making disciples who know how to make disciples? And the problem was we didn't know what we meant by the word disciple. Right? So if I were to say the
absolutely.
word, if I were to say the word football to you, we're starting to talk about the Cowboys or Texas A&M disappointing football in my world, or we're talking about something along those lines, right? I mean, it's just is what it is. That's my
Yeah,
world. I battered Aggie syndrome is a real thing, and anyway, so if we talk football, that's what we're talking about. But you take a quick flight across the pond, and you start talking about football, and suddenly it's Manchester United and a black and white round ball.
yep.
Same word, very different things. And so that's the way like
That's
disciple and discipleship has just become this junk drawer term that means everything, so it means nothing. And so like if you don't know what you're producing, then you back that up and say, okay, how are we going to get there? Well, then you definitely don't know what you're doing. So or another illustration that works in my mind is kind of that assembly line of making a vehicle. If you just say to Ford, hey, make a vehicle, they're going to go, okay, a car, a truck, two wheels, four wheels, how many doors? Like you can't just say make a vehicle because then we don't know how to create the assembly line to get that product. So if you just say make a disciple, you don't know what that means. I have no idea how to put a structured pathway in place to get that disciple. So we just started defining what do we mean when we say disciple or disciple making, right? Intentionally entering into someone's life,
yeah.
evangelism, so that they might know and follow Jesus, discipleship, and be able to. So a devoted follower of Jesus, disciple, who joins in where Jesus is working already, right? That is a disciple. how do I get there? Now, to accomplish that, I can back up and say, this is what it means to be successful. So to go back to your question, how do we evaluate ministry or events? Man, we put it in this grid of, is this essential and is it functional? Based on a clear definition of disciple making, of what a disciple is it essential to that? Every program, every ministry, everything we do, is it essential to accomplishing that? And is it functional, right? So you put it in one of those four quadrants. If it's essential and functional to that goal, keep doing it. Do more of that. If it's essential and it's not functional, then you put in extra work to make that functional because you see that it's essential. If it's not essential but it's functional, that means it's working well, but it's not essential in accomplishing that goal. You got to stop doing that, and those are the hard ones to kill.
Yeah.
If you can't redefine it to make it essential.
Yeah.
And then the things in the other category, right? Not essential, not functional. Get rid of those things. Like, that's just wasting time.
Yeah.
Right. But we can't adequately and faithfully evaluate things if it's not through any filter of a clear definition of discipleship. So got to change the scorecard, right? Got to go from we as the church are holding the scorecard and we're holding it saying, okay, you're not doing this, you're doing this. Instead, I want to hand the scorecard to students and our leaders and their parents and say, here's the clear metric of what it means to be a faithful disciple according to our context. You have the scorecard now. We can ask you good questions, but we equip you to do the work of the ministry. That's why, like, I don't do school visits anymore, right? I don't do school visits.
Yeah.
I changed the thinking of how it's been done. Of culturally, churches are the pastors are the players, the congregation are the students, they're the fans, and the field is the church. And we've got to change our thinking to say, no, the pastor is the coach, the students are the players, and the field is your circles of influence, where you live, where you work, where you play. So you got to change that paradigm of where ministry happens and who it happens through, right? Like, if a kid messes up on a football field, the coach doesn't say, give me your helmet, I'm going to go take your spot. They don't do that. They come over, coach them up, send them back out into the game. And that we don't do that. We say, hey, let me go to your school for you. And this isn't the motivation of all. This would have been my motivation, though, which is why I changed.
Yeah.
I go there and say, I don't trust you to do the work of the ministry, so I need to come reach your friends for you. Instead of saying, no, let me equip you up here at church, send you out to where ministry happens. And so I let them do it. I don't bail them out by showing up. Again, that's me personally. That would have been my motivation, because I can't shut up, right?
Oh man, that is so good. That's awesome. As you were talking, you kept saying we a lot. I know you're talking about your team, but like, how do you, if you evaluate those events that aren't necessarily beneficial or essential anymore, how do you cast that vision to parents and leaders to help them be on the same page? Because it's easy to sit in our office and say, hey, this paintball event's not serving a purpose anymore. But like, how do you cast that vision to people to say, this is why we're making that decision?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's where your leadership shouldn't be hearing about what a win or what a definition of disciple is at the same time as you're trying to redefine or recategorize events, right? Like, they should be on board with that way before that point happens.
That's true.
And so you're not doing ministry to them, you're doing ministry with them or through them. And so if you're, the whole old adage, right, a leader with no followers is just a weirdo, right? And so if you're trying to lead in a certain direction and you haven't gotten anybody on board by casting good vision, helping them understand the why behind all of this, and the art of asking good questions, right? That's where I go, because it's not me telling you, it's me including you by asking you questions and legitimately valuing your response to those questions.
Yeah.
So like our team, we have 3 staff in addition to myself on the student ministry team, and then a whole host of leaders. But I asked them, they helped speak into what we define as a disciple and disciple making, and they agree. So then they had their own shot at putting everything on this quadrant of essential and functional and according to our definition of a disciple. And they got to have their voice heard. And we in a meeting, we sat down and put everybody's answers. Nobody knew whose answers were whose, but there was pretty solid 99% alignment on where everything needed to go. And people understand it. It's really simple. On the other side of all this hard work, it's not simplistic, but it is simple, right? But simple's hard. And so, but it's a way to say no to good things, right? Of all of the 100 good things I could do in student ministry, what are the one or two things that I must do in our context to create a disciple who knows how to make disciples, right? 2 Timothy 2:2, right? That's kind of the motivation of the whole thing. And so it gets different. Where one of the questions I really like, and this I cheated and listened to your last podcast, and this was a question that came later on, but a quote from a different pastor. Man, I heard a pastor say, "Hey, you need to start asking your people this question. You need to pretend like I am a high level private tennis coach. The first question I'm going to ask you, if you want lessons from me, is, do you want to win tournaments or do you want to have fun on the weekends? Because how you answer that question is going to determine how I coach you, right? And
It's
so that's very
drastically different.
Yeah, wildly different. So if you got a whole bunch of people showing up that just want to have fun at church, I'm going to pastor you in a very different way than people who would say, no, I have bought into a story greater than my own, and I'm trying to identify where God is working in the world and enter in there. And I want to be a fully devoted follower of Jesus who knows how to make right. That I'm going to treat those two different groups separately. They're going to get more of my best energy and my time and leadership. And that's okay. Like, different people get different things. And Jesus modeled that for us, right? So
yeah.
I don't apologize for that.
No, that's so good. And then my brain just went to, okay, and using that analogy of a tennis coach, like, our people may say they want one thing, but we know biblically they need another thing. And so that's helping them get to, okay, I know you want to have fun, you want to do these things, and we can still do that. But ultimately, our goal is to be this disciple, which kind of gets back to the very beginning thing you're talking about, identifying the goals so we know why we're doing what we're doing. Whew. That whole section right there that was great.
And being, like, honestly, being okay with, like, there's students that are at, and if you want to use the familial kind of analogy, right? There are those that are spiritually dead, but there's the spiritual infants. There's spiritual children, right, who are growing up, but there are also spiritual, like, young adults who, that's where you're as their spiritual parent, trying to help them start to leave the house, right? Grow up and move out on their own. Like, that's how we view them. For us in student ministry, that's very practical, because you're letting them go out of student ministry off to the military, college, workforce, wherever they might be going, to grow up into spiritually mature adults, right? But being able to just say, hey, I'm not going to put an unreasonable expectation on somebody who is a spiritual infant, who, as Hebrews says, right, you should be teachers by now, right? We shouldn't need to be going back to the simple things and the spiritual milk, right?
Yeah.
You shouldn't, but that's the reality of where we are. So let me give you what you need for where you actually are and help you grow up. And if they're interested, the way that we say it in our student ministry is, I'm not looking for spiritually mature people, looking for spiritually hungry people. And I'll walk with spiritually hungry, as asking questions, being open to, being receptive. I'll walk with them. I'll run with them all day long, rather than people who would just say, I'm seeking spiritual maturity, because what I see most of the time is that just, I want to attain some spiritual knowledge and be perceived as mature, and it has a tendency to go towards that Pharisaical sort of attitude, and a heart for people is lost, right? But some spiritually hungry people, I want to be like Jesus. I want to be with Jesus. I want other people to know him like I know him. That's what we're looking for.
Damn. Oh, well, okay. One more question, and we'll wrap up with this. And this
15 minutes, right?
Yeah, 15 minutes. Yeah, no. I think this has all been great. So last thing, and this kind of, as somebody who's listening to you, maybe somebody for the very first time, you obviously are good at student ministry. I feel like you understand student ministry. So how in the world did you come to the decision, okay, it's time to transition out? It's time for me to move, because now you're discipleship. And so for so many people, they may just sit in a student pastor role. Student ministry is so important. I'm a student pastor. You are a student pastor. By no means am I belittling student ministry. But how did you know, all right, Lord, it's time. I need to move to the next thing. I need to move to the next phase of life. How did you know that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was at a conference in Nashville, and just happened to be out with some of the other pastors at one point, and a local pastor just randomly shows up, knew a guy that was going to be sitting in this circle. I've never met the dude before, never have seen him again since, but he asked me a question in a way that changed everything for me. And this was 4 years ago, probably 2019, I think. And up to that point, everybody had always said, hey, do you feel, are you going to stay a youth pastor or something to that effect, right? And you
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
win answering that question. As a youth pastor, you can't win, because if you say, yes, I feel called to a lifetime of student ministry, then it's, well, there must be something wrong with you. You're not like mature enough. You don't really want to grow up. You like just playing the games, and right, there's a lot of false assumptions made, and so you can't win. They view you as like a junior pastor, and
Yeah.
if you answer it as no, I don't view myself as a lifelong youth pastor, then it's like, oh, so you're just in this until a better opportunity comes along, right? So you can't win either
Yeah.
way. And so this guy
Yeah.
asked me the question. This was like his introduction. Hey, what's your name? Cool. What do you do? Awesome. Where at? Sweet. Now, let me ask you, do you feel called to a life stage or to a generation? And I looked at him and I leaned back in my chair and I said, I don't know if you understand the impact and the gravity of that question in my life. And maybe it was
Mhm.
just me at the time. I don't think it is. Because if I feel called to a life stage of middle schoolers and high schoolers, then I'm going to stay with them no matter what generation comes through. But if I feel called to a
Yeah.
generation, then as they move out of student ministry, my pastoral heart is going to move out of student ministry with them. And so that's what I would say is where I'm at is I have felt called to, me specifically. I never felt the Lord call me to student ministry. The Lord specifically called me to the local church. And so I can easily say no to like parachurch ministries or organizations. As much as I love
Yeah.
camp and all that stuff, like if they called, it's an easy no. But the local church, I want to serve the Lord as faithfully as I can in the context of that local church, wherever my gifts intersect with the greatest needs of the church at that time. And with that next generation, if that is the way the Lord ordains it, man, that's the way it's worked for me. And I do, my pastoral heart, I can feel moving much more for our college and young adult students than our sixth graders, right? Because it's a new generation and I'm called to that next
Hmm.
generation behind me. So that's where it was everything for me to be asked that question in that way.
Wow. Well, Chris, I hate to say it like this, but you did fail. You did not set the bar low. You
Oh man.
set the bar for this
Well,
so high. Oh my gosh. I think I just said wow like 50 times throughout the whole thing. But
oh,
oh my gosh. All right. Well, thank you again, Chris, for spending a few minutes with me, about 30. Thank you for doing
yeah.
that. I think this is really going to help some people. And I just look forward to future episodes, and maybe we can get you back on later and we can talk about some more stuff.
Man, I would love it. Get some football talk in next time.
Hey, Brandon, after listening to this, will probably swing you over to that podcast too.
Let's
But
go. Let's go.
again,
I appreciate y'all.
well, again, thank you, Chris, so much, and I hope you have a good day.
Yeah, man, you too.
And if y'all are listening, this is the first time, make sure you subscribe to the Intelligent Nonsense podcast, and you can get any of the podcasts that are under our umbrella, but specifically this one, the Ministry Podcast. So we'll see y'all next time.